Hey everybody, you're here on Drum Talk TV, being invaded today by Working Drummer podcast with Zack Albetta out in Atlanta and Matt Crouse in Nashville. Welcome, guys. How are you?
We're doing great.
Awesome.
Thank you for welcoming the invasion.
Yeah, absolutely.
We hope to be greeted as liberators.
Well, there certainly needs to be some liberation here at Drum Talk TV, so we welcome that. Hey, let's start by, well, for those of you watching, you know, some people think that people that work in the same space are competitors. It's black and white, and that's how it works. When I first started Drum Talk TV, I started interviewing fellow educators, and some people thought, like, what are you doing? Why are you interviewing your competitors? And like, it never struck me that they are competitors. And then we've done work with Modern Drummer. We've done work with Drum. We've done work with at Drum Channel. I interviewed Stuart Copeland as Drum Talk TV on the Drum Channel set. They invited us to do that. Rhythm Magazine, we shared a booth with Rhythm Magazine a few NAMM shows ago. And what I do love about our community as drummers, and I think that's one of the things that sets us apart, is that it really is a community. We were talking a little bit about that before we came on live, and we'll get into it. If you look at other musicians, I think that by and large, I don't think guitar players say, hey, try it out. Whereas drummers go, whoa, that's such a cool snare. Yeah, come here, let me show you. Try, you know, and it does that. You know, we're like so much more literally communal in sharing gear, and you know, we show up and support and watch them play, and we don't keep secrets about how we do stuff. And I think that's just something inherently different about drummers. What do you guys think about that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And Zack and I have been welcome on other platforms. And when we first started back in 2015, it seemed like an odd fit, but quickly we realized that sharing platforms with other podcasts, other type of, you know, programs like this was a lot of fun. We had something extra to talk about aside from drumming, talk about sharing, you know, this type of platform. Yeah. And also reminding our fellow drummers that, like, hey, we're all open to this. This isn't a competition. We're sharing ideas. We're growing together.
Yeah. And it's just a lot more to share. You know, it's like a whole other dimension, whether you look at it as the broadcast side, the business side, just so many different things come with that. And I think that that's important, that people are open to those takeaways, you know?
Yeah. I don't know what it is about drummers and the drum community, but I think you're right that we are more connected and communal than other sort of communities that are grouped around an instrument. You know, you just look at all the drum content that's out there, like just the number of drum podcasts that, you know, and some of them come and go. There is sort of some churn. But you know, there's like a dozen or more at any given time. And if you look at, you know, bass podcasts or guitar podcasts, or, you know, like there might be a couple, but, you know, drummers just want to get together and talk about drums, for better or for worse.
I have a theory though, and I think the reason why drummers get along so well is we don't have to work together, unless we're in like a 38 Special tribute band. We typically don't have to share the stage with the other people, and so it gives us a chance to, like, hey, how was that bass player? Yeah, he's a pain in the butt. Yeah, I agree. You know, the different kinds of things like that.
That's funny, and that's true. There's even not a lot of bands that have a drummer and a percussionist. There's some, you know, and they're great and all of that, but even that is different, you know, because they work together. The way I feel about it is they work together the same way that a drummer and a bass player works together, as far as holding it down, the rhythm, the foundation. And then the percussionist, I think, is almost on the other side of that, doing the enhancements and embellishments and things like that. So it's sort of a neat triangle when you do have that. But yeah, there's not a lot of bands that have two drummers playing through the whole thing. There's 38 Special, there's the Allman Brothers. Genesis doesn't count. That was only live. And then there's, I don't know. There's not much more, right?
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's true. Tedeschi
Yeah.
Trucks, Grateful Dead. Well,
Grateful-
and Zach, you just came off a long tour where you were using percussionists on a regular basis, but in
Yeah,
different
yeah.
cities.
Yeah, it was really fun to be able to. We had actually had two percussionists on our show, and like we were in a city for at least a week, so we would hire percussionists and some horn players and a couple of string players locally, to enhance our touring band, like the rhythm section core. And yeah, getting to play just with over the course of 16 months, I played with, I don't know, 100 different percussionists.
Wow.
We had 2 per city, 50
Wow.
cities. Like,
So I have
it
a
was really
question
cool.
about that. Have you, and this is for both of you, and anyone watching, go ahead and chime in, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, chime in. I'll read questions. I can show them on the screen. We'd love for you to be part of the show with us. But my question to you guys is, have you ever played a song without a percussionist and then under other circumstances played with a percussionist, like the tour that you were just on, Zach, for example, in a different instance, maybe you played those same songs without a percussionist? And does it make you play differently when you're playing with a percussionist? And how does that dynamic differ?
Absolutely. Playing with a good percussionist just really takes a whole lot of pressure off me, and it's pressure that doesn't need to be there in the first place. But if you're playing without a percussionist, especially if you're doing well-known cover songs, you want to fill in those gaps, right? You want to add those little ornamentations and enhancements to your drum set part, and sometimes that works out, sometimes that doesn't. But if you've got a good percussionist, and on my show I was spoiled with, because there was 2 percussion chairs. One did primarily congas and hand drums, and the other did primarily tambos, shakers, cowbells, all that kind of shit. So when you've got that engine room with you, it's just like, oh, I only have to play the groove.
Yeah.
I don't have to do anything else. They are all of the icing on the cake. And it's really just a joy to be able to sit back and do that.
That's neat. Matt, have you had an experience like that?
Kind of the opposite. Mostly, I rarely have played with percussionists outside of like university type situations. But there was.
I thought you meant the opposite, in the sense that you hate percussionists.
Drummers in general. Always tapping. No, years ago, there's a great band here in Nashville called the Long Players, and they'll take a record and they'll play it, beginning to end, and just kind of copy it. So it could be a Jackson Browne record, Rolling Stone, Queen, whatever. But they were doing a couple Beatle records, Rubber Soul, and another just early Beatle records. And we were both. The drummer called me to sub for him, and I'm like, man, I'm going to be out of town. He's like, where are you going? I'm going to Colorado. He goes, well, that's why I need a sub, because I'm going to Colorado too. And we're both playing on the same festival with a band I was in, and his group, the Long Players. Steve Eby, great drummer, teacher here in Nashville. And he said, well, since you're going to be there, would you be interested in playing percussion on these 2 Beatle records? I mean, we're talking maracas, shakers, tambourines, just like the classic stuff. I was like, that sounds amazing. And I had never really, again, after school, had really never done a lot of that. And what I can tell you is the pressure to know tempos, to count songs off, was gone. There's pictures of me. I'm smiling the whole time. I don't have that dour Neil Peart grumpy look that I normally have.
Overly concentrating to make sure everyone doesn't turn around and point at you or grimace.
It was Steve's responsibility. And I'm like, so this is what it's like to not be the drummer in a band.
Yeah.
The responsibility. And it was so, of course, the songs were iconic, and to try and catch that vibe from those early records was amazingly fun. Now, to do it full time, I don't know if I would, but at the time it was amazing. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I have done lots of gigs where percussion is part of tracks that are embellishing a gig, and so that's kind of nice. At least it's reliable, and sometimes it's me playing the percussion that I'm playing along with, and that's not always too uncommon with certain artist gigs where you have the tracks embellishing. But I wish a real human being was there. I'm envious of that situation for sure.
That's a neat take. I've had the opportunity to play live as the percussionist only like maybe 2 times out of playing 54 years. Like, I'm just realizing that. That's weird. Really? That's it? And I can remember the instance, and it was a band run by a friend of mine called Enough Said out of the Ventura, Oxnard, California area. My friend Keith Capsuto, great drummer. And they played stuff like Tower of Power and James Brown, you know, kind of some crossover stuff like that. And they played some festival or something in Port Hueneme, which is out in that same area. And I don't know how, I don't even remember. This is years and years ago, how it came to be. But he said, so why don't you sit in and play congas? And there's some other stuff there you can play with. It's kind of like you said, like it's almost like I had no responsibility. I'm there and there's all these toys and I'm like, okay, I'll pick this thing up now. You know, then there's congas. And I'll never forget, I had not played hand drums in a long time. And I actually had 2 fingers that started bleeding from just having so much fun and not paying attention to, you know, how I was hitting or how hard. And I just loved it. It was so much fun. That lack of pressure I can totally relate to from that experience. Yeah.
I mean, you both talk about sort of the lack of responsibility that comes with the percussion chair, and I get what you're talking about. Like,
but it's not like there's no responsibility. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can still make or break a song. Like, you can still make a song feel better or make it feel like total trash.
Yeah.
Depending on whether or not you know what you're doing, depending on whether or not you know the actual techniques associated with each one of those little toys that are in front of you.
Yeah.
And whether or not you know, it's just like drum set. You have to capture the flavor of whatever song or genre you're playing. And, you know, on this tour I was on, we were doing all Temptations music, you know, all Motown, and some of the percussionists we hired knew exactly what they were doing in that bag. And some of them had to be coached and got there. And some of them we tried to coach and they never got there.
So what you guys are reminding me of is actually my New Year's Eve gig was with 2 bands I play with. And but they use a couple different drummers, and so for the New Year's Eve gig they combined bands and we had 2 drummers, so we did double drums on stage with my friend Jake Gammon.
Oh yeah, Jake. Yeah.
And so like
King of Lower Broadway.
That's right. So we were going back and forth playing with that, and I brought a set of congas, shaker, tambourine. And when I was playing drum set, he would maybe play toms and different things like that. And when he would play, I might do that, but there was one song that I was playing congas on that he was playing drum set on, and there was no rehearsal, none of that stuff. We were just going to go for it. And so I'm playing, and he's got a talkback mic. And so halfway through the song, he goes, "Crouse, pick up that tambourine. Just do that." I'm like, okay. Like, I'm not a conga player. So he's like, "Yeah, this isn't working." But I mean, that's not what he said. But he's like, "Crouse, grab that tambourine." Okay. Yeah. Because he's playing drum set, you know. So so to your point, the responsibility, you can break this, and there was just something about what I was doing on the congas that wasn't working for whatever reason, and Jake's like, I need to keep this together. I need you to switch to something that's not messing.
Yeah.
It was super fun. It was super fun.
One of the probably the top percussionists I always enjoy watching, and it's funny, he always pops up unexpectedly, like, oh, now he's with Rick Wakeman, oh, now he's playing with The Who, now he's with Elton John, now he's with Pete Townsend, and that is the legendary Ray Cooper. I just love watching him play the way, even with like if I can grab this real quick,
his tambourine technique is out of control.
Yeah. I mean, even so that it's not too loud, even just that he's so, you know, he has some techniques I've never seen anybody else use on such a simple frame drum instrument. One of my dogs who sleeps under my desk just got up and said, "Yeah, I'm out of here." Sorry. You know, just something that simple and subtle. And you could see that he's so into it and so deliberate with the timing and how he hits it, where he hits it, the velocity he hits it. And then he jumps on the congas and he's just ripping away. And he's so much fun to watch. And I've seen him live, I think only once I've seen him in person live, and that was way back in, someone correct me, I'm sure. I'm going to say 82, 3 or 4. Does anyone remember the Arms tour, the benefit that featured Simon Phillips on drums, and it had Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck. For a while, Joe Cocker was on the tour, but when I saw them instead, it was Paul Rogers. And everyone was playing everyone else's music and the big ensemble. And Ray was there playing percussion.
Yeah.
And that was the first and only time I've seen him live. But I've seen him on film with many different things. One of my favorites is Rick Wakeman's Six Wives of Henry VIII, filmed at Hampton Court. And it's just amazing watching this guy go from one orchestral or Latin percussion instrument. And that's the thing. There's all those other, areas of percussion that aren't necessarily related that he'll jump to. And there's other people that do it too.
Another guy that's really great about that is Jamie Haddad.
Yeah, for sure.
He'll just have shit from all over the world.
Yeah.
And play the shit out of all of it. And we've interviewed, obviously we're mostly in the drum set lane, but we've interviewed quite a number of percussionists, like a vibraphonist, a steel pan player, Joy Laps. I interviewed her like 6 months ago.
Cool.
So it's really interesting to get the perspective of people who are in our world. They're percussionists, but they're not drum set players.
Right.
So to get their perspective on, everything they hate about us.
Is there have you noticed a common denominator amongst that topic?
No, I mean, I was mostly kidding, but like they love locking in with a down to earth drum set player as much as we love locking in with a really tasty, mature musical percussionist. We're the cake and they're the icing, and the better both of those things are, the better cake it's going to be.
Absolutely. You can do a lot with an egg shaker that will either make it too frilly and ruin it, or it'll be just the right nuance to give that other layer and dimension. Something that simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. So how did you two meet, and how did you get Working Drummer podcast off the ground? Let's talk about your journey and your show a bit.
Was it Friendster? Was it? What did we meet?
I think it was the early days of MySpace.
Early days, yeah. It was an ad in the bathroom of 7-Eleven. It was one of those tear off tabs. Want to do a podcast? Well, so this is tied into what we were talking about, collaboration. When I first started the podcast in 2015. There weren't that many, and I know Dan, you had started before us.
In 13.
In 13, there weren't that many podcasts out there, but one of them was Drummer's Resource with Nick Ruffini, and I needed to learn quickly how to do this thing. There weren't platforms to just upload an MP3 and then spread it amongst the podcast outlets. There were very few. There was maybe iTunes. There was iTunes pretty much.
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yep.
So a friend of mine here, Jeff Brown, knew Nick, was on his show. I interviewed Jeff. Jeff said, reach out to Nick Ruffini. And so, it was just kind of one of those, took a meeting and got advice from him. And, we became friends. And over time, as we connected more and more, he said, hey, I have a drummer lives in Los Angeles who is starting to write articles for me, and it's under the Working Drummer Forum. Was that the name of it?
Working Drummer Spotlight was
Working Drummer Spotlight
series of articles I was writing, and it was Zack over there. It was Zack. I didn't know Zack, and Nick was looking to kind of expand his network and put a group of podcasts together under an umbrella and include Zack and I under one thing and partner. And I just was unsure. Like, man, this is my baby. My friend Mike was helping me kind of get it started, and I don't know who this Zack guy is. And
So
Nobody does.
as we started to develop it, and Zach and I would get on the phone through just a series of events or whatever. Just Nick was not able to bring it to fruition, his idea. But in that time, Zach and I had been on the phone a handful of times and talked about, him doing some more things. And I don't know, man. I connected with him. I felt like he's going to offer something in his experience that I don't have. At the time, living in Los Angeles before he moved to Atlanta, and you were making the move to Atlanta.
Yeah, at the time we met, I was near the end of my. I think like we already knew that we were moving from LA to Atlanta. So when we started talking, it's like, I've been in LA, I'm about to leave. I can, stockpile some interviews from LA people, and then I'm moving to Atlanta. I can dig into that scene. Yeah, like, Matt was about a year in, probably 50 episodes in. And it was a very Nashville centric podcast because that's where he lives. And that's, the community that he basically started the podcast to connect with. Yeah. And at the time I was still pretty heavy in the jazz world. My background is in jazz. So we thought it was a good 1-2 punch for, Matt to cover, the rock and country and pop people that he knew in Nashville, and I could cover, jazz and other sorts of folks in basically everywhere else. Like when I sum it up for people, there's definitely some overlap. It's not this black and white, but I tell them, Matt covers Nashville, I cover everywhere else. We're over 450 episodes in, and he hasn't run out of cats in Nashville. Like,
Dude, I swear to God. And some of the cats you've interviewed who were like New York guys have moved to Nashville, or LA guys have moved to Nashville. And no, but to his point, I wanted to not be a Nashville centric podcast. It was so easy for me to sit still and just line up the talent to come through. There's so much to talk, and there continues to be that for a variety of reasons. But I did want to expand that reach and that perspective. And so, along with the workload, as you guys know, it's any advice for anybody that's starting a podcast or something. I say, rule 1, consistency. You pick once a month, twice a month, 4 times, whatever it is. I was putting out an episode every week, and it consumed my world, and I needed help. I wanted this to continue to be fun. I wanted to so it was there was just so much about it. And I think Zach was really open to kind of like hear what I was doing, adapt to kind of fit where I was going with it, but still bring his own voice to it. And then quickly, the trust that was established, then he could say, hey, how about we do this? How about we do that? And, 2 heads better than 1. And I feel like it just, gosh, man, I mean, how many times, I can't even think of a time that we've had a disagreement where we couldn't say, like, I really think we should do this. And the other person says, well, I'm not digging that. But then we kind of like figure it out, like, well, why? And you'll say, well, I just feel like this is a better move. And the other person's like, oh, okay, cool. And it just seems to work. It works out in that way. And it's and as we all know, being in bands, being in different types of situations, being married, there's compromise, there's hills you will die on if it's that important to you. And having that respect and trust for someone that you're partnering with is super important. And that has been a wonderful experience to work with somebody that has ideas and can compromise and different things like that. That sets a standard for me in how I conduct myself when I'm working in different projects, whether it's in a band thing or whatever. I'm like, this is how I need my life to go, because otherwise it's so.
I get that so much on so many levels. Like, part of me can say, well, at my age, but when I think back to my 20s, I left doing the band thing in my, it's kind of blurry, late 20s, early 30s, where I just got tired of that one significant other's drama and that one always being late. And why is the battery always dead in the wah-wah pedal? And, all the stuff that goes with it. I'm sure I was not, the most glowing angel, but that whole dynamic of being married to 3 or 4 other people. And I started to get into doing a lot more session work, producing a lot of other up and coming artists, writing stuff, voice casting and voice directing for commercials, and then writing the jingles and doing the music. And I just got into that whole other sphere and found it at that point in my life, a very enjoyable working experience, rather than having to either very much get along with some people in the band while tolerating others. And the collaboration process I still love, but I do remember back then. But again, I'll be 61 in a week and a half.
Wow.
I know more now. I'm not a different person. I just, like my dad used to say, even when he was in his late 60s, he'd say, yeah, I'm the same person as I was when I was 22. I just know more shit. So when you know more stuff and you utilize that knowledge, that wisdom comes with time and experience. I feel like I have that. And I have people that are, a bit older than me that say, oh, you're still a baby. And I say, it's not about the age, it's about the mileage. And I do have some mileage too. Funny quick story on that regarding age. I'm real close with my 6th grade teacher, and he's 91 years old. Wow. And he lives in where I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. So Zach, I'll ask you about LA in a minute. And I go out to visit him 2-3 times a year. And I was out there in December, and we're watching sports. My dad's gone. My mom's gone. My dad was a big basketball freak. So I love sitting with Mickey and watching basketball and boxing. I grew up on that stuff. So we're watching, and I said, I'm going to get us another water. So I got up and I went, and he laughed. He says, what are you grunting for? You're only 60. It's all perspective, right?
Oh, man, it's amazing. Yeah. So speaking of band, I was listening to Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend podcast, which I love. And he had John Bon Jovi was his guest, and they were talking about his new documentary and being in a band. And Bon Jovi described being in a band as like all the members, it's like being in a sexless marriage. And Conan said, so it's like being married.
And Zach, where were you in LA? What part of LA?
We technically lived in Beverly Hills, but we didn't like to tell people that because they reacted like Beverly Hills. But we were at like Robertson and Wilshire. It was a normal little apartment. It was our zip code was 90211. Mm-hmm. But we didn't really spend time there. We slept there, but we didn't do life there. My wife worked on the West Side. I obviously worked all over the place, as you do when you live in LA.
What time period was this?
This was 2010 to the end of 2015.
Okay, so I was already way gone from there. I was born down the street from the Forum, where I used to go see the Lakers and saw my first real concert, which was a Flash in the Pan band called Led Zeppelin. So I can't even pronounce it. I was born down the street from there, but when I was 10 months old, my parents moved to the West San Fernando Valley, and I lived there until the Northridge earthquake in 95. And then I moved to Ventura near the beach for 14 years, and then moved back with one of my daughters after going through a divorce to my parents' house again to take care of them. My mom was real ill and my dad was still recovering from something. But when she passed, I knew my dad was going to move to Vegas. And I had no aspirations of moving to Las Vegas. My sister lived there, and he was going to add on to her house and just live his life out there. And I went there to visit with him, and before he moved there, and it hit me like, why wouldn't I want to move near my dad? We were really close. So I ended up moving there like 6 months before he did. And I met my wife 3 months later, and we moved from there to where we live now. I didn't say where we are, folks, in the beginning. Those of you who follow Drum Talk TV might know I'm in Globe, Arizona. Where that is that? I don't even know when I live here. We're actually 100 miles east of Phoenix up in the mountains, and I miss the beach. I missed the beach in Vegas, but I love it here. It's a really, really small, they call it a city because it's incorporated, but there's 7,200 people here. and there's almost no one to play with. And I don't play that much with, like my wife says, he just plays with himself. I don't jam a lot, but I have a few people that I can, wife and I go to an open mic sometimes and she sings, I play hand drum or something. And that living in LA and growing up there as a musician was like, I knew that I was where everyone was trying to get to in the 70s and 80s when I was tearing up LA and Hollywood and all that, playing around and stuff. And I never took that for granted. And when I left, even though in Vegas there's 400 bands to see on any given night, right? Whether it's a golden platinum band or someone in a lounge or someone in the casino lobby or whatever. But by then I wasn't with anybody. I literally was playing with myself, just turning on my favorite music and blasting it through a PA. That's why I wear hearing aids, never protected my ears, and just did my own thing and have fun with it. And being the Drum Talk TV guy, I think I'm having more fun as a drummer now than I ever have. And I've done everything. I toured, I did sessions, I played locally all through LA. I've composed, I've written, I did, like I said, commercials, I did music for short films, I produced, I did almost everything. And I'm having more fun now, I think, because I like the business side. And I get a chance to talk to people like you who are also drummers that have different experiences. And sometimes I'll bring someone on the show that isn't very well known at all. Maybe I even discovered them, but they have a great story and they're great players, but no one knows about them, but they have a story.
Yeah.
And they get to be on the same platform as Carmine Appice, Nico McBrain, and, you know, pick your favorite big name drummer. And I love that part of what I do, what we do. And as a drummer, I have a studio with 3 drum sets, and I just go down and bang my brains out and get it out of my system, and it's a blast. I love it. But once in a while,
yeah, what you're talking about is one of the reasons that Matt and I joined forces. Basically, is because we wanted to, you know, shine a light on drummers not just in Nashville and LA and New York, but in cities all over the country and all over the world who don't have as big a population or as big of a scene or as deep of a bench, but there's truly world-class musicians everywhere. And you know, it's also cool to learn about sort of the regionality of local scenes, because you know, and especially in a place like New York or LA, and increasingly Nashville, it's musically omnivorous. You can find any kind of music you want. But in talking to drummers from the Pacific Northwest or Cincinnati or Kansas City or Atlanta, or like, you find out like sort of the, you know, a little bit of the musicology, a little bit of the music history of that region. And, you know, it might be the place where they currently live and work. It might be talking about, you know, a place where they grew up, that sort of plays a role in,
or a place where a famous musician is from. And that's kind of like their thing, that it's why we're musically famous here, because so-and-so is from this town or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Especially the smaller the town, the bigger that impact that has.
Yep.
You know,
I'm preparing for an interview tomorrow with a drummer that's originally from Pittsburgh, grew up, works in LA, a little bit in Nashville. And I'm looking forward to kind of picking his brain about how Pittsburgh shaped his musicality, his drumming, you know, the way he sees things. It's definitely a part of Pittsburgh's a pretty, you know, it's just one of those cities that, you know, you can tell when people are from certain cities, and Pittsburgh is one of them, you know, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great topic, Matt, because as you said, Zach, you know, there's also those different cultural influences. You know, if you take Pittsburgh versus Austin versus Nashville versus LA versus a really small town in farm country somewhere, there's different cultural influences, and people from these different areas have different models of the world in general. Even if they believe in different religions or spirituality, just socially the influence on them is different. I have found, my wife's from the Bronx, and I've learned that people from the Bronx are pretty forward. But I knew someone from Pittsburgh that was so like in your face A-type personality, always selling. He couldn't talk without bringing up something he had first. It's interesting, and that those are cultural reflections.
Yeah, very much so. It's been interesting being from the Midwest, living in the South, and then knowing people from the East Coast, the West Coast. Nashville has become such a melting pot
Yeah, and a
that
magnet.
yeah, and it's really fascinating to not only get to kind of speculate where someone's from based on my conversation, but also by their interests in music, their style of playing, different things like that. Yeah, it's been fascinating, and I've learned so much. And again, going back to trying to not make Working Drummer podcast about Nashville, it's sometimes really hard not to just be like, well, this person is from, from another country, or, they just happen to live in Nashville, or they, because there's so many varieties of drummers and musicians that come here to do whatever. And now that there's more variety of music, like Zach's saying, than just country music or whatever. So it's
That's
been
cool.
One of the things we've been talking about a lot lately is just the changing face of Nashville, and
Mm.
I feel like there's kind of a battle for the soul of Nashville right now, and
Because it's become so much more of a cultural melting pot with so many people coming from around the rest of the country.
yeah, but it's the like Nashville is still Nashville, like country music still runs Nashville. But the dividing lines are partly generational, it's partly genre. There's racial dividing lines in the musical community, I think.
Really?
And so yeah, it's growing exponentially. I mean, Matt has lived there for over 20 years, so he could speak a lot more about it than I can. I've spent time there over the years. But yeah, people are just flocking to Nashville, and millennials and Gen Z musicians are sort of filling the ranks everywhere, from Lower Broadway to the independent studios to there's a jazz scene in Nashville right now. So yeah, I'm just kind of like watching from afar over here in Atlanta, like what is Nashville gonna end up as here in 10 years?
But you are so right, man. You are so right, because when I moved here in 2000, there was still an older white grip on the traditional Nashville music business scene. They call it the good old boy system.
Right.
You don't hear that as much, but man, they are holding on with desperation. As you see, again, this next generation bringing in fresh talent, great ideas, and it finds its way into country music in beautiful and wonderful ways that make, in my opinion, country music more interesting and appealing and musical. But you still have the other producers, artists that want to hold on to that. And again, it's a weird thing, because it's generational. It's been around for decades in this town. It's hard to break that up. And also, when it comes to country music in general, fans are dedicated. So with especially older country music, once you have a fan, they're your fans for life. With pop music and some rock music, sometimes it's like, yeah, they were great. I love that one record. I saw them on tour, but I don't listen to them anymore. Yeah. But having worked with some older country artists, I can tell you, man, these fans will buy every record, come to every show. My point is, there's no incentive for people to change, and whether it's stylistically or whatever. But there is so what happens is there's resistance to this type of change, which I think is beautiful and necessary. And it manifests itself sometimes in racially bad ways,
Interesting.
No, I
Or
mean,
just not, and it's not just along race lines. It's just you know, I
yeah,
think Nashville and the country music mainstream has become one of the fronts in the culture war
Mhm.
mhm.
in general that you know our country is going through right now, and it's sort of you know, some big name country acts are on one side of that line, and some other really big name country acts are on the other side of that line. So yeah, I mean, apart from the sort of changing face of Nashville, and just in terms of the kinds of musicians that are there and the kinds of music you can see in Nashville on any given night, um, you know, the thing that Nashville is known for, which is mainstream country music, is itself like at war to see like which side which side is it going to come out
Wow,
on.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. Let's talk about the show some more. Your guys' show, Working Drummer Podcast. For each of you separately, what are some of the things that are you would consider notable takeaways for listeners that each of you are really proud of? Like, this is what we give. You know, this is what people can pick up. This is what they can go away with, and here are some reasons to listen.
My voice. My mother-in-law says she listens to it. It helps her fall asleep.
helps me fall asleep. That's for damn sure.
That's funny.
I don't want to take Zach's answer, but I think the most obvious thing is that when we stumbled upon the name, and then it manifested itself into kind of what the mission statement, if you will, is it was showcasing the in the trenches drummer, the working drummer, not necessarily the person you're going to find on the cover of Modern Drummer or whatever, or a household name, but the players that are out there making a living and balancing it all with life, family, other things like that. That was something that I aspired to do, Zach aspired to do, and are doing. We're both working professionals, and happy with balancing all those things, and not. So we get a Dave Weckl, we get Todd Sucherman, we get some of these names from time to time, and the beauty of that is not only can we extrapolate how do you make a living, what would be your advice be to somebody that wants to, you know, run a home studio, maybe, you know, play on the weekend, whatever, to do this. There's just so many different ways to make a living in the industry that a lot of us just aren't aware of. A lot of people aren't aware of, because a lot of people looking from the top down only see the award shows at the time, video, you know, back in the day, videos, hear what's on the radio. Of course, now it's so mixed up, but now with new streaming, with new platforms, how are other indie bands, individual musicians, how are they doing? So kind of a bit of behind the scenes. And that's one of the things I'm mostly proud of. And the fact that we've joined forces with a couple other drumming centric podcasts, they brought us into the fold, called the Drum Click. They brought us into the fold because it's what we do. It's our stamp. It's our personality. And that's one thing that that a lot of listeners have told us. That's what I like about what you guys do, is that you showcase my buddy who is doing what I want to do. I don't have to be the next Todd Sucherman. I don't need to be but I can actually, you guys have inspired me to quit my day job, move to Nashville. I mean, this has happened several times. We've had people like, I've been listening to your podcast for so many years, and it gave me the confidence I need to then move out of my small town in Mississippi and move to Nashville. And then this particular drummer became the touring drummer with the band Saving Abel, and has just been crushing it, but is because of the podcast. And that just is very, very inspiring.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that with you, Zach.
The reason people sort of get that confidence from what we do is that I think it, like, we bring making a living in music and making a living as a professional drummer down to earth. because it's not magic. It's not something that, you know, the gods anoint you with and suddenly you're a professional drummer. We've interviewed over 450 drummers. We have heard 450 different definitions of success and 450 different paths to it. And, you know, we don't just talk about the drums. One of the things I love about our podcast is that, like, you know, if you want to talk about drums, if you want to talk about gear, if you want to talk about chops, it's endless. You can find so much content about any of that.
That's not lacking.
Right. But, you know, with each of our guests, we try to get into, you know, what it is like for them to do life as a working drummer. What have been the obstacles in their life and career, whether they're personal or professional? We've talked about mental health. We've talked about addiction. We've talked about relationships. We've talked about physical health. Like, we've interviewed so many drummers who whose careers were interrupted by an illness or an injury or, you know, a death in their family. So I really like the fact that we talk about, like I said, just doing life as a professional drummer, everything that entails, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because, you know, if you watch Larnell Lewis on, I'm going to interview him soon, actually, but if you watch somebody like him on, you know, Drumeo, or you back in the day you were reading Modern Drummer, it's like, how do I get from where I am? How do I get from my fucking bedroom to the arena? Like, it seemed impossible. It seemed like a magic trick. But in talking to all these drummers, I think we've illuminated, you know, A, it's possible. B, there are 1,000 different ways to do it. C, there is no timeline. Your path is your path. And that's actually been really helpful to me personally in my career, just talking with all these different drummers and realizing, you know, my path is my path. Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes.
So
yeah, definitely. I love that. Thanks for sharing all of that. Before we go, I'm going to do something that I just love doing in all of our interviews for years and years. And that is, it'll have a slightly longer name this time, but this is the Working Drummer Podcast, Matt Crouse and Zack Albetta Fun Fact segment. And what I like to ask is, and you'll each answer separately, when you're not doing the podcast, when you're not playing a gig, when you're not on tour, when you're not working on chops, when you're not setting up drums, tuning drums, changing heads, doing anything, having anything to do with music, what's the peek behind your personal curtain? What do you like to do outside of music?
You go first.
I'll go first.
Go for it, Zack.
Anybody who's listened to the podcast at all knows that I'm just a voracious cook. It is my second love, close behind drumming. You know, I will work in a cooking reference or analogy to almost every interview I do. And it's to the point where I actually interviewed another drummer, Marcus Finney, about cooking. Like, we did a whole episode. Marcus Finney is just a phenomenal Nashville drummer, and we found out we're both super into cooking. So I was like, dude, let's just do a cooking episode.
That's awesome. So before we go to Matt, I don't know if you know this, but I fell in love with the medium of video because I had a cooking show on TV from, I think, 2001 to 2005, 4.5. Yeah. And it's funny, this morning I had a meeting with my executive assistant, McKenna, and we were talking about cooking. And I said, do you use we got in this whole topic of using a cast iron skillet, because I've always wanted one and I didn't have one until
you don't have one?
Ago. I do now. But I didn't until like a year ago, and I was telling my wife somewhere, and I saw a cast iron. I said, I've always wanted one of those. And then I realized, okay, I can get one. I got one.
Yeah.
And it's been great. I just love it. But we had this whole conversation about that. So I love that. For me, it's another form of creativity. It's therapeutic. I'm a big foodie. I should weigh 400 pounds. I don't. I weigh 155. Found out 5 years ago I'm diabetic, which was like, what? So that's been a whole journey right there with food and my relationship with food and being responsible about it and knowing when to cheat, how much to cheat, and all that. I don't do insulin, metformin, or any of that. My doctor is a huge advocate for that. So it's been a whole journey. So that's awesome.
Yeah, the cast iron skillet is the Ludwig acrolite of the cooking world.
Yeah.
It's cheap, it's a workhorse. It'll do anything. It'll last forever.
Yeah.
Eminently gettable.
So when you say last forever,
there it is.
Oh,
there it is.
When you say last forever, we have on our kitchen wall a cast iron skillet that belonged to my wife's either grandmother or great grandmother when they were in St. Kitts. Her family's from St. Kitts in the Caribbean, and that thing still, we could probably cook with it if we wanted to. But
pull it off the wall, season it up. It'll do anything it did 100 years ago.
Yeah, cool. How about you, Matt? And we're being invaded again. So I have a cat that comes in. She'll either jump on my lap or there's a plant back here that she'll chew on.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm hungry. Just listen to you guys right
now. How about you, Matt? What do you like to do outside of music? What's your jam?
You know, it's been interesting. Well, maybe it's not interesting, but I feel like since I left a touring gig about a year and a half ago, and my goal is to stay busy in town, and so I feel like I'm doing it. I feel like every day is consumed with something to keep my workflow going and to stay busy, working with a variety of people. So honestly, I am the worst at doing things outside of work. I'm doing something musically, and most recently, because of just my age, repetitive stress injuries, if I'm not drumming, I am doing something to better my health or to get into better shape to continue to drum.
Well,
so great. My interests outside of drumming still are related. Probably the only thing that I do that is because I have to check my middle-aged man card is my interest in the Second World War or history. So I've got podcasts I listen to, books that I read, and stuff like that. And every once in a while, I find somebody else that's just as afflicted, and we go in these rabbit holes. And my wife loves to give me shit about, we're going to learn about tanks today on our trip to Ohio.
Great. That's one of the things that allured us to this little old 1800s mining town that we live in. Is it's a time capsule from the old West. We're both really into history, and there's like our home, the original house that was this home when it was built is one room. That's my wife's main work area. It's 15 by 35 feet. And that was actually the house when it was built in 1909. And we're only the fifth owners since then. And it was added on to by every owner before us. So I get the whole history thing. That's neat. A mile from my doorstep is a ancient Native American ruin site with a museum and everything like that. Salado Indians. So I dig that. That's cool. That's great. And it's healthy to have something, no matter how much we love what we do, no matter how much we pour ourselves into it, it is great to have something outside of that.
I should say if there's and I have to make space for it, and I recognize that this is what makes my music and my drumming better, is when you invest in the people that love you and support you. So that was the reason I say that is because I have failed in that arena in the past, and I have been struggling hard to make up for that. So doing more together, planning with my wife to do things together. I have two sons, and they're in college now and stuff. So they require less of my time. And yet, at the same time, that is another aspect of my life aside from drumming that I've obviously is a big part of who I am, and I identify as just a super proud father of two young men that are just crushing it in life.
That's great. My wife and I feel the same way. And we have our kids together. One of them I'm heading right here. I'll change the view so everyone can. Some people know Sage, who's right here. We have 5 rescue furries. She's the first one we got. She's going to be 8 next month. A Maine Coon. We have a Russian blue cat that's 7, and we have 3 dogs. The oldest one's only going to be 3 next month. So they're kind of like our kids that we had together, and they're the ones that help me remember I got to get out of this room that doesn't have windows and get off my butt and go out and run around, play, go for rides, take breaks, and disconnect for a bit. It's really important. You know, people who say if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life is the biggest bunch of bullshit ever. No one can tell me that I haven't worked hard, or you guys, you love it. It doesn't take away from that. But it's such a wasted platitude. It's ridiculous. But I want to stop before we hit an hour because Steve is going to download this and put it on Instagram. I want you guys to be able to do the same. We'll send you the links to everything. We can always do this again. There's always so much to talk about. That's another common thread about drummers. I see her casually stretching, pretending she's not going to go eat my plant, and you're not. So I want to thank you guys for taking time to join me on Drum Talk TV and talk about your musical journeys, your drumming journeys, your relational journeys, and of course, Working Drummer Podcast. Folks, you can find them on all the hot, popular podcast platforms, as well as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. It's all in the notes of the post. Check out what they're doing. Over 450 episodes. They must be doing something right. And we're always figuring it out along the way, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's a great show. It's an honor to be on your show, and I'd love to have you guys again here on Drum Talk TV sometime.
Thanks, Dan.
Appreciate
Thank you, everybody. Hang out with me, guys, for a moment after we disconnect. And folks, thanks for following what we do here on Drum Talk TV. Check out drumtalktvbrilliance.com, our new membership site. We got all kinds of wonderful guests coming, 2 new game shows, some Q&A sessions, including Derek Shulman this weekend on Saturday from Gentle Giant, who went on to be the president and CEO of Polygram Records, Adco Records, Roadrunner Records, is now doing some other stuff. So that'll be fun. And everyone have a great day. Thanks.